Hello and welcome everyone to our live event. Today's topic is the art of writing tax advice, brought to you by Tax Nuggets Academy. Let me introduce you to our instructor today, who is the founder and director of MRTG Taxes, specializing in tax compliance and advisory for small businesses. Please put your emoji hands together to give a very warm welcome to Matthew Hardy. Oh, I love the emojis. Yay.
No,
Did you see that? Did you see my background? Yay.
That is awesome. I need to learn how to do that. I'm not sure I'm worthy of that, but I need to learn how to do that, Joe. So you'll have to show me afterwards.
No worries. So what is on our agenda today? One of my favorite topics, I have to say. I'm super excited because it's super geeky.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about writing some tax advice. And better still, we're going to be talking about researching and writing some tax advice. So you are in for an absolute treat, everyone that's here. This is one of my favorite topics to present on and to talk about. A, because I get to talk just in general, and B, because I am a giant nerd, as will become apparent from the content in this session.
And I really think it is an art to it, right? Which is why it's fun. Yeah,
I think so. And look, some people would say there's a little bit of voodoo or wizardry in it as well, which is why I have my trusty little cauldron beside me on the desk. And that may be a special guest at some point in the part of the presentation, but there is an art, there's a knack, right? But we also want to show you all that there is a formula. We love formulas and processes, don't we?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right.
I think we should show people what that formula might look like.
Sounds good.
All right, so we have an agenda. It's a pretty jam-packed agenda. We have 90 odd minutes for this session. I want to try and give people the chance to ask questions throughout. This is probably a slightly more heavy topic for those of you that are existing TNA subscribers. You'll find this is a little bit involved in certain cases, in certain spots. The idea of it really is to try and tease out some of the issues for all of you that you have to deal with when you're dealing with requests for formal advice, right? We don't necessarily get asked for formal advice every day, but when we do, we need to know how to be able to deal with it, how to be able to respond, work out if we can respond or whether we need to get help from somewhere else, and work out the formula and the process by which we can actually make sure that we can serve our clients appropriately. So to do that, I have come up with a fictitious case study mashed together from a whole heap of different places that I think sort of adequately gets across some of the context, some of the nuance that you might come across when you're dealing with writing tax advice. And we're going to introduce you very shortly to Mr. X and Mr. X's CGT conundrum. We'll go through the process that I use when writing tax advice. This is not a hard and fast rule. This is just Matt's tips or personal idiosyncrasies, if you like. But I think you'll see as we go through this in the agenda and through the presentation itself, that there really are some key things that you need to focus on when you're doing this. So Joyce, what section of this are you most excited for me to present in the 7-step process? Do you have a favorite section?
Not really. I'm just going to look out for all the MTR, GTNA, HTs, which you might want to explain what that is.
Well, yeah. So we at Tax Nuggets here like living a little bit on the edge and doing things a little bit differently. MRTG, TNA, HTs are MRTG Tax Nuggets Academy Hot Tips. This will be filled with hot tips and you guys get a prize. We're not entirely sure what. Maybe it's just recognition for the person that can spot how many times we butcher MRTG, TNA, HT throughout the session. I think
what is MRTG, by the way? That's your company name?
MRTG is my company name, and that stands for the 4 members of my family, Matt, Rebecca, Teddy, and Grace. So we are MRTG, and Tax Nuggets and Hot Tips. They all kind of just go together really nicely. So watch out for the little light bulb. Feel free to, I don't know, like you can do whatever you want. If you've got a drinking game that you want to play in the background every time we come up with one of those, please feel free. Just keep it outside and banters throughout the chat as you need. So obviously at Tax Nuggets here, we are young and hip. And I thought the best way for me to sort of connect with you all as an audience is to show you that I am also young and hip. And I want to present you a Facebook meme, because who doesn't love a good Facebook? That's what all the cool kids are still doing. We started it in the early 2000s and we're still cracking on with them now. Because this really does sort of describe tax advice, or the process of writing tax advice, right? A lot of people think there's a lot of complexity to it. Is it black magic? Is it not? No one's entirely sure. I'm here to tell you that it's actually a pretty simple process and it just involves a lot of thinking. It's not artistry as much as I would like to think that I am the Van Gogh of tax advice. I really am not. I would not be painting you a portraiture, although I do think my advice looks all right. Obviously, for everybody here at Tax Nuggets, we think this is the best job in the world, so we will be unashamedly proud of doing that. But maybe MRTGTNAHT number one is don't show your age by showing off the fact that you learned about Facebook memes in 2010. I suspect, Joyce, all of the cool kids are now on what, Snapchat or Instagram? What do we call it? The Gram, Insta? It's got to be a term for it, right?
I still think it's Insta, but please feel free to correct me, anyone that's Gen Z out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Vote thumbs up for the Gram, heart for Insta if you think that is the proper term that we should be using, and we'll see how you all go.
Oh, looks like
I think Insta wins,
yep.
Joyce. I think Insta wins. I think I should stick to my knitting and not start to try and start a new trend. All right, so tax advice. We are going to make this a session where we will go through some legislation as well. So for everybody that's here, long live the Master Tax Guide, all hail the Master Tax Guide. But there is more to life than just the Master Tax Guide, and I'm going to show you a little peek into that world if you haven't had it, because I kind of feel that peek into that world is going to help you a lot when you come to start writing tax advice. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should just take a peek into everybody else as well, Joyce, by launching a snap poll. Let's see what everybody thinks of this question.
All right, just give it a second to load.
Oh, there we go.
So yeah, let us know what is your confidence level writing tax advice. So you've got a few options there to join, scan the QR code or Wicked Mobile, or go to slido.com and enter in those numbers. So you've got a few options to select. I'm scared to open legislation. Let me punch the numbers into a Form C instead, or I just dashed out a 20-page letter this morning instead of hitting the gym.
Just because you can.
Yeah. Third option, I wouldn't call myself a gun, but I think I could muddle my way through a letter. Or I'm still eating my lunch because I promise I'll answer the equivalent poll at the end. All right, let us know which one you are. Well, 5 years ago, I was probably number 2. I would be dashing out letters every week, at least one letter a week, I would say, back in KPMG. And I really enjoyed writing, the whole process of researching, writing. It is, you can really get into a flow, I believe. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Although I do probably think I should sometimes put down the pen and paper and actually hit the gym instead.
True. All right. Wow, 65% sort of dabbled. Yes, wouldn't call themselves a gardener, but could muddle their way through. Right. So we're dealing with, quite a sophisticated crowd, Matthew, I reckon.
I like that. We are dealing with a sophisticated, let's just say a tax advice curious crowd, shall we? I think that's a good start. And look, I appreciate whoever you are, the 3% that answered that they dashed out a 20-page letter this morning. Like all respect to you for that, because that is a decent effort.
Mm-hmm. But we've got 13% that are pretty scared to open legislation. So
okay.
We'll keep them in mind.
We'll try and calm the fears of that 13%, because I promise you, it's not as scary as it sounds. Look, when we talk about writing tax advice, right, we actually need to think about what we're saying. What we're talking about when we're writing tax advice, we don't just write it for the heck of it. Well, okay, maybe I do sometimes when I'm feeling a little bit down and I need to cheer myself up. I can either use Netflix, I can talk to my wife, or I can just go and write something up, okay? Maybe you're not like me, though, right? Maybe you're actually writing the stuff with a purpose in mind. And that purpose in mind, because you're all small business practitioners, or maybe in some cases the owner of that small business practitioner, you are doing this with a purpose in mind. And that purpose is to communicate with your client and to get the points across that you need them to understand, okay? So when we think about formal tax advice, we need to think about it in context of what we're actually trying to do, right? You have a broad suite of communication tools with clients, right? A lot of the time you'll just be picking up the phone and calling them. You might be emailing them, subject to whether your partner allows you to send emails or not, and the level of the information that actually goes inside those emails. I certainly know when I started a little while back in the profession, I won't say exactly how long because it will definitely show my age up more than a Facebook meme. But we had to definitely get like approved for sending by X person up the top of any email that went out if they were email communications. Because again, an email communication was a form of communication with a client that they would rely on in some cases, right? Down the other end of the spectrum, you've got the people that don't actually put anything down on paper and just say everything verbal. Because if they say everything verbal, it's much easier for them to sort of say either, oh, you didn't understand me, or to sort of fudge a little bit around the edges, right? So we've got a broad sweep of things that we do, right? And formal letters and advice is really just one subset of that, right? But it's really a critical one when the rubber hits the road. If you've got a client that has a gnarly or tricky situation and they are actually looking to you for something and for something quite detailed, you need to know how to deal with that box, okay? And how you deal with that box is understanding overall within your firm what the overall client communication strategy is, how you're going to approach issues like this. You're going to practice to the extent that you have the ability to practice on internal documentation, right? I know when I started at PwC back in the day, there were a whole heap of things that we needed to do as part of that process to ensure that we had internally documented what was going on with a particular client file or a particular client matter before anything even went out to the client, right? They were called matters for the attention of management or partner or whatever you wanted to say, right? So we already had some practice with writing that stuff internally by virtue of the fact that we were expected to be able to distill complex topics down into bullet point bite-sized bits to be able to practice to be able to then send that stuff out to clients. I'm assuming, Joyce, that you would have seen something similar in what you did, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's think about the things that we want to do when we're contemplating writing advice, right? We really want to understand what the purpose of the advice actually is. Are we writing this just because we want to practice on something and the issue doesn't really justify writing formal advice? Or is the advice something that the client has really asked for and we agree with them that it kind of is needed, right? For us to agree with them and say that the issue is needed, the issue to be addressed is needed, we need to kind of understand at least some idea of the significance of the issue. And that might be significance in an absolute term, right? So it's a big number just in general, or it could be that it's a big number in the context of a particular client, right? If you're dealing with an issue that goes to the root and the heart of a client's small business, that's a really big issue for them, right? And we have to make sure we understand how we're going to approach that issue. Does that issue need formal advice for whatever reason? Because we think that this is going to come back to bite someone if we don't document down properly why it actually happened, right? The client impact and the materiality there is absolutely critical, right? You then need to decide, okay, well, the client wants this. We think it's necessary. Do we as a firm have the capability to be able to do that, right? Not all firms do. And there are a lot of firms that are absolutely happy to stick with the basic level of compliance and to have that good client relationship. And then they outsource the advice part of this to someone else, right? It's called white label advice. There's a lot of people out there that do white label advice. And what their speciality is to be able to come in on those very particular issues and do the job that's needed to ensure that the client and the firm are protected from a risk management standpoint, right? Because that's ultimately what tax advice is about. It's about risk management and risk identification when it's all said and done, okay? You also need to think as part of this about the client relationship, the budget that you're going to set for this and the value proposition that you want to give to your clients. You don't necessarily want to be turning away clients because you don't think that you have the capability if that's something that you really want to grow into, right? We're setting this session up very much as a growth-based session for the existing subscriber base and for the people that are joining that want to see what Tax Nuggets is about, to help them understand how can you actually grow through the levels of something like that, to go from just being the person that punches the items into the form I or the form T or the form C to the person that's able to have the conversations with the client, to understand what the client wants, and then to be able to write something up that suits the purpose that the client needs it to suit, okay? So let's talk about case study, right? All right. Meet Mr. X. Mr. X owns 2 units. He has owned these 2 units, must be nice, in Sydney, in a 25-year-old complex in Surrey Hills, okay? He owns the units 100%. They are adjoining units in 80 Latte Street and Surrey Hills. That sounds like a good street to be on for me. I do like myself a good cafe in inner Sydney, city. Now, obviously, Latte Street does not exist in Sydney, but if it did, I'm sure this building would be there and would be an excellent building for him to have owned into. He has owned these properties since the early 2000s, and he has decided, like most good people do, to sell up and to move to the Gold Coast. Great location, Joyce. Wouldn't you agree? Gold Coast is a perfect spot to move to. Nice weather, not cold, not miserable and wet like Melbourne, right? Something like that.
And he can hang out with his buddy Matthew Hardy over there as well.
Look at that. He's coming up here. Like that is it. He's got taste and style as well. Okay, so he has used these two dwellings together as a single dwelling after he and his wife married in the early 2000s. So we've already got some questions to think about. And then he tells you, in addition to this, that he was overseas for a while. He moved overseas for a couple of years when he and his wife were posted to New York. Okay, so this guy has traveled the world, right? And now he's coming to live on the Gold Coast. So he's reaching like peak living standards when it's all said and done. He has asked us the question, what will be the capital gains tax implications if I sell my properties? Okay. Now you're sitting there thinking, okay, this is interesting. There's a few things to unpack in here. Firstly, props for coming to the Gold Coast, like your style. And then the other question is, okay, well, what other questions do I need to ask? How do I approach a question like this, right?
Because where do we even begin? There's so many.
Where do we even begin with this? There's so many things here, right? Why did you move from Sydney? Why did you buy in Sydney in the first place? Why didn't you just come straight to the Gold Coast? Okay. There's all of these questions that we may ask over drinks or over lunch when we take him out after this advice is done. But at least for now, we probably need to think about, okay, well, how do we approach this? What do we need to do? Okay. And so we think about this and we apply a 7-step process. Now, we all love a process and we all love steps in a 7-step process. We would like you all to tell me your favorite stepped process in the chat. If you have one that is better than the 7-step process for writing tax advice. Off the top of my head, I can think of the 12 steps to recovery. I can think of the movie, The 39 Steps from Alfred Hitchcock back in the 1930s, I think. If you've got a particular favorite set of steps that you want to throw into the chat and banter with us, please feel free. This advice is going to follow a very formulaic step process, okay? These steps are designed for you to be able to follow and understand individually, and we will spend the rest of this presentation going through these steps. Now, if you are thinking, oh my gosh, how long is this going to take and how do I know where we're up to? Don't worry, I am actually going to map these items out and they will change color on you throughout the presentation. That is the quality of the advice and the service that you get from your Tax Nuggets team. So strap yourselves in. You need to follow this process, not to say Matt told me that I need to follow this process, but because I think this is a pretty good way of you trying to get to grips with the fact that you need, that there is a way that you can do this without feeling like you're overwhelmed and just need to lie down before you even start. What I like to do when I get an issue like this is I like to think about, okay, well, what are the issues that I need to think about, right? Like, and just write them down somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you don't need to write them down as professionally and color coordinated as I have done there on the screen with all of the boxes perfectly sized and perfectly spaced, right? Just write them down on a piece of paper somewhere, okay? You don't need to be me. This is not a session about turning you into a MAT or an MRTG or a Tax Nuggets clone, right? This is enabling you to think for yourself, right? The first MRTG, TNA, HT is write all of the issues down that you think might actually be relevant as part of this advice. So we're thinking, okay, well, if he's lived in these properties, maybe there's a main residence exemption that we need to think about here, okay? And he's moved out of these properties. I think there's something in the law at some point in time that I remember reading about the fact that if you move out of a property, maybe you can still continue to treat that property as your main residence. Okay, let's have a look at that, okay? Now, he also threw out some other thing because Mr. X is a very sophisticated guy, obviously moving to the Gold Coast. He's got good taste, but tax is not his thing, right? So he's also thrown out issues like stamp duty and land tax. And you might be thinking he's a seller. It probably doesn't matter, okay? But let's just write them down anyway so we can get a list of all of the things down there on paper. And you are going to refer back to this list at all times. And you may well find as you get through this advice that you need to go back to your issues map and actually write a couple more things down because the trick to this is not necessarily knowing everything, right? I know early on in my career, I felt absolutely overwhelmed about the fact that I had a stack of legislation that was that high, and I felt like I knew about that much of it, right? The trick with this stuff, and everybody will tell you, even people in these very, very senior firms or that are very senior heads of taxes in organizations, I've met them, I've spoken to them. They don't know it all, right? The point is not to know everything. The point is for you to know how to find out the answer, right? Where to look, how to go about problem solving, right? It's about being curious. It's not about being overconfident and knowing that you just know everything, right? It's impossible. So write them all out somewhere. I do also like stick figure drawings. So if you also like stick figure drawings, please draw yourself a stick figure drawing of Mr. X and his wife somewhere, and we can see who's the best stick figure drawer at the end of this presentation.
I was just going to add that this case study is actually really complex, and main residence exemption is one of the most complex areas of the tax legislation. So if you're feeling daunted, that's totally normal.
Absolutely normal. Look, when I did this, I spent way longer than I needed to do going back and rereading the main residence exemption, reading what the ATO had to say, reading what other people had to say online to make sure I understood it, because it's complex, right? You're absolutely right.
The rules, but then the calculations are also really hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy. And it's funny because it's something so bloody common, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Like everybody comes across this at some point in time. If you've either bought or sold property, well, if you've sold property that you have previously bought, you have on some level probably had to deal with the concept or the topic of main residence, right? And so you need to think to yourself, okay, well, this job isn't just about writing the advice, right? You're in the business. You want to actually be able to do this at a price point that makes sense to your client and to ensure that you also make money on the deal, right? You're not there as a charity. You're there to provide a service. You're there to provide a service at a price, right? We all forget about this aspect of it, about the practice management aspect of it. And look, maybe you've got clients that are well-heeled enough to not to bother to ask you for a quote or a scope on something like this. But my guess is that a lot probably would, because they're saying, okay, well, if you give me something formal, how much is it actually going to cost, right? So let's say we're going to provide some draft advice, okay? And we're going to provide some draft advice and we're going to scope it and say, we're going to give you some draft advice that outlines what we call the indicative CGT consequences of transferring property, right? And it's not actually a 50% share of property to spouse. It's actually transfer of the entire property out. I changed a few things around and then obviously clearly missed the fact that in this slide, I had left that in, okay? So we have an hours estimated quote that we actually need to do. We need to look at some then optional items, okay? We might say, okay, there might be 5 to 6 hours worth of research time associated with this. It might be 2 or 3 hours associated with modeling the end result. And then we might say, okay, well, we've got to add some write-up time. And then maybe there's some other things that we actually need to do, right? We might need to do some more detailed calculations for Mr. X to be able to come up with what we think is the right answer for him. We might want to ask, does he want to do a private binding ruling associated with the particular issue that we're dealing with, in case he's not thrilled or in case his risk profile or risk appetite is slightly different to ours, right? Because the reality is when we do this advice, we're giving what we think should be the answer, and we're giving that based on the best available facts. The way to get that certainty is to also talk to the ATO and see whether you can get something more concrete out of them, okay? So my next MRTG TNA HT, I think I've said it right so far, is to allow enough time in your quote and your scope for research and for write-up. Because if you don't allow enough time for that, you will end up burning a lot more time than you need to on a deal like this. Now, if you're the partner or the director of this firm and you're happy to invest some time in your staff actually doing that learning process, you might be okay with that, right? You might have an internal estimate and external estimate, just depending on how much staff development you're wanting to do. Just be aware of what that number is and the fact that you are actually investing that time as part of that. We work on a time-based system, like it or not. We are selling time and expertise as a package deal. So make sure that you understand what that's likely to be. And then we're going to do some fact finding, right? Because clearly our clients don't always tell us all of the facts that we want to know. That's our job. Our job is to actually get the facts out of them, okay? When did Mr. X buy these properties? When did he purchase them? When did he move into them? Where did Mr. X move from? Did he move from another property? Was he somewhere else? He said he was overseas. Okay, how long was he overseas for? When did he leave? When did he come back? Did he get any advice previously on whether he was a resident or a non-resident for tax purposes? Okay. Now, for those of you who are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, please take 2 Panadol and stick with me, because there is a reason that we ask these questions, right? Maybe not all of these questions are relevant, right? We hope to be able to just get the answers out of this to figure out what is relevant by mapping the facts to the issues that we think might be relevant per the first slide. And then ultimately, we want to know, well, how much are these things worth, right? Like, if we're talking about a property market that may not have been doing so well for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe there's not much in the way of overall capital gains for us to think about. But if we're dealing with a market that's been really hot, okay, the issue's significance and size may well make a big difference to how much time we want to invest in this, because the dollars in absolute terms and the dollar value for the client in impact is going to go up, 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 and up. Okay. Now, someone raised a question in the chat. How can 2 properties be have the main res exemption at the same time? Well, that is a really good question. That's one of the things that we actually want to understand. How is that possible, right? Like, he's used 2 adjoining units. Okay, well, how did he do that? How did he use those 2 units together? Is there a way that we can actually say that those 2 units together are considered a main residence for tax purposes? I don't know. Let's ask the question. Let's get a bit more detail on what he's doing, and then try and figure out from a curiosity standpoint whether it's something that we think we can actually work with. So congratulations, you put a scope and a quote out there, and maybe towards the end we'll talk a little bit about what that scope and quote might actually look like. And he's given you some more information. Hooray! This is the part where you start to get more excited, because he's actually giving you the information that you think you need, okay? He's giving you a list of key dates. Great. A list of dates. I love lists. I love lists and I love tables. You will see lists and tables all throughout this presentation. Okay. List of dates. When he moved into the first of the units. So he's got 2 units that are side by side, unit 210 and unit 211. Okay. And it turns out he actually owns property beforehand. So he has gradually been migrating his way from colder climates to more warm and temperate climates. So he was originally from Hobart, and he sold a Hobart property and moved to Sydney. Okay. Then he's moved from Sydney to the US. Then he's come back. Okay. And we have to figure out when he's actually done all of that stuff and what we're actually going, how we use that information, right? Because even just based on those dates, we don't necessarily know how we're going to use that information to work out the answer. Now, I will say to everybody here, if at some point in time you get lost in the facts of the case study, I'm using the facts of the case study to illustrate the process, not so much to give you the end result, okay? I have not given you enough information in here for this advice to really make sense, even if you're an absolute gun on the main residence exemption, okay? Do not be alarmed, do not worry, right? I am withholding information. I'm deliberately making it hard, because what I don't want you to do is focus on the answer. I want to focus you on the journey of how we get from point A to point B. It turns out that Mr. X had this Hobart property until its sale, and he sold that property in July 2010. He moved into the Sydney unit in 2008. So he had owned 2 properties at that point in time for a little while. Then he bought the adjoining unit to 210, being the unit 211, which was a smaller unit. But basically, he needed extra space because he got married. Congratulations, Mr. X. Well done, you. He got married. They decided, no kids, the 2 of them. They just decided that they needed a little bit extra space. They had a lot of family coming from interstate. They needed a little bit extra space to be able to have clothing and the like stored, and for Mr. X to have a home office associated with his business. I don't know that we actually gave Mr. X a job in this, Joyce, but shall we call him something in finance, given that he went to New York? Let's call him a trader of some sort. I know that's boring and unimaginative, but do you think he suits trader as that type of a profession?
Why not?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. He has lodged tax returns. He has told us he wasn't originally a client of us. We've only picked him up over the last year or 2. He's lodged tax returns while he was away as a non-resident. Okay. Okay, that's good. That's another piece of information we needed to know. Of terms of the units, he left Unit 210 not tenanted while he was away, and Unit 211 was partially tenanted while he was away. We asked him about the cost of how much he spent to buy these apartments originally. We were met with a shrug of the shoulders. He's got nothing, right? So we need to go back and ask a whole heap of information around that. But we did find through our internet sleuthing that on realestate.com, you can get historical property purchases. So we were able to at least get the value that he paid for that property. And we put a proxy in there for stamp duty as well.
Good luck getting the cost base, the proper cost base.
Exactly, right. He's got 15 to 20 years worth of strata reports to go through to get his quarterly levies and everything else. I do not wish him that. I do not wish that job on my worst enemy. That is a horrible thing, but could be potentially very valuable for him. The good news is as well, when he's returned from the US in September 2019, his return from the US is permanent. He is back here for good. He and his wife have decided that they've done their thing overseas. They've seen the bright lights. They've seen every Broadway show that was possible to see. And they're now coming back to enjoy the ritz and glamour of the Gold Coast. So now we are going to turn it over to the audience to help us figure out some issue identification. So we have some questions here, Joyce. Shall we go through the questions?
Yep. Scan the QR code or join us at slido.com with that number on the screen. But yeah, what are your preliminary thoughts? So which of these statements are correct or is true? So Mr. X should not have to pay any CGT because there's no CGT on real property in Australia. Or Mr. X shouldn't have to pay CGT because there's a rollover relief available if he makes a voluntary property transfer. Or we need market valuations of the property when they left for the USA and when they returned. Next one, the main residence exemption may hold the key to this advice. And finally, the CGT discount is not available to non-residents. So which one is correct? Is that we can only pick one? Is that right?
I think it's multiple choice.
Okay, good. Yep. Select which one you believe is true. It could be more than one.
Could be more than one.
Yep. I can see we've got more than 40 people on it already. In the chat, we've got some people putting in 5 is a popular one. The CGT discount is not available to non-residents. Yes, so that will complicate matters. I don't even want to see what the CGT calc looks like. One of the most difficult things to work out, is that carve out. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I like some of the answers here. People are really thinking about this. I do like where people's heads are at. I think we have a very sophisticated group of people on our hands, Joyce.
Yeah. Seems like lots of people are saying 3, 4, 5. Let's see what the so the green ones are the true ones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep.
Still pretty good.
Yep.
It's still pretty good.
So
now, you go, Joyce.
I was just going to ask, why is that second one, we need market valuations for, that time period? That's not quite right, Matt?
That's not quite right. So it is right in certain circumstances, right? So this is where, if you've been doing this for a while, you might be thinking in the back of your head, there is something around when I move overseas. Do I have to pay CGT when I leave? And there is a rule. Oops, I just dropped my pen. There is a rule in the legislation, and it's CGT Event I-1, which talks about if you cease to be an Australian resident and you've got certain property in Australia, you may well have to pay tax on that then, because non-residents, as people would have seen when they went and did a foreign income tax session with me a couple of weeks ago, non-residents of Australia do not pay capital gains tax unless it is on taxable Australian property, or TAP, right? So if you own Australian shares and you cease to be a resident in Australia, if those shares are not taxable Australian property, let's just say they're shares in Telstra or one of the big banks, or in the scrappy little startup that launches an IPO shortly called Tax Nuggets Academy and skyrockets in value, then if you leave Australia and are declared a non-resident, you have a deemed disposal of those shares at that point in time, right? There is an exception to that, and you can elect to basically leave those shares inside the Australian tax net when you're a non-resident, okay? So you don't have to automatically, but it is worthwhile thinking about all these things and just asking the question, well, is there a deemed disposal at all? Am I able to basically step up my cost base at that point in time for something that may have happened a number of years back? right?
Yep.
So I throw it in as a red herring because the reality is when you're dealing with this stuff, you actually need to think about all of these different possibilities. And this may well be a valid line of inquiry. I'm just hoping you don't go too far down that track and you sort of shut it down when you realize, oh, it's actually only in relation to this. Okay.
Yep. Understand. And so because it's real property, there should not be any deemed disposal because foreigners are still subject to CGT on property.
On real property. Exactly right.
Understand.
So those two top things are relevant. And look, the reality is when you get to this point initially, you may not have all the answers, right? So we're not expecting 100% accuracy here. But what I would say is that you all, for those of you that have answered this poll, you've all hit on most of the key issues that you would have to think about if this was a different type of asset that was being disposed, right?
Yep.
If this was shared. And look, it's maybe a question that you need to ask Mr. X as well, right? Did he actually have any other investments or shares at the same time? He's come to you to talk about a property now. Well, you can talk about a property now, but did he also have shares over the last couple of years that he's sold that he might have forgotten about, right? Maybe we actually need to go back and do an amendment. So you are not wrong to think that there might be a question to ask around market valuations. And that's where sometimes when you start picking at one issue, you might find another issue, okay? Your client may not love you for it initially, but they will like you for it in the long run because your job is to protect risk for them.
Yep. Yep. So it looks like we've picked out the two big, issues that there could be some sort of main residence exemption. How much is the question? And then, the discount is not available to non-residents, but how much of it do we have to remove?
That is,
if any.
Absolutely right. Yes, exactly right. And someone in the chat has made a reference to a very important date for the CGT discount. So for those of you that are following along, a shout out to that person because they have not spoiled the surprise, but they have given you a bit of a lead in as to where we're going on that. So thank you for doing that. I do appreciate it. Okay, this is where this stuff gets a little bit more involved, right? So I'm going to talk to slide 19 and I'm going to give you some more MRTG TNA HTs. I would also like you to think about slide 20 in this deck, which I believe should be a couple of pieces, extracts of legislation, right? And I believe some of those we've actually linked. So when we're talking about these things, you can't just rely on what someone else has written, right? You need to understand, in a lot of cases, if you're looking at other advice that's out there that's basically just sort of Google articles or web articles or whatever else, you need to understand the reasons why things have been written in the way that they are, right? So we have to be able to get back to the source of our rules, and our rules is the legislation. And for the main residence exemption, our key rules are in Division 118 of the 1997 Act. Now, because this is not a session which is going to be entitled a deep dive on Division 118 hosted as a fireside chat by Matt Hardy from MRTG Taxes, we are going to spare you a lot of the detail and we are just going to hit the high notes, okay? But what I want you all to do is to not be scared to actually look at page 20 and start to try and understand and read the legislation bit by bit and just dip your toe in the water of what these provisions say and what they're actually intending to do, okay?
So can I just ask the audience, for those that have read legislation, where do you go? Do you have the hard copy or do you go to, I don't know, you use CCH or Osley? Oh, yep, Osley, Lauren. Yep. Feel free to share. Are there any particular good tools around? Or is the book still, the Bible?
Yeah. It's pretty good. Now, does anybody know what OSLI actually stands for? Because I didn't until yesterday when I was asked this question. A bonus point to someone that knows what OSLI stands for and can help us with that. Look, it's really relevant, right? You need somewhere where you can actually see this stuff, right? I actually always liked the 3 volumes of legislation and getting the Master Tax Guide. It was like the highlight of the start of the year when that sort of set of books showed up on my desk and I was able to sort of unwrap it like a kid after Christmas and put it up on my little shelf in the teeny tiny little cubicle that I had before I was mercilessly shafted to a hot desk and wasn't able to keep anything at my desk. So these are all of the things that no one here will have to deal with going forwards. Look, online legislation is great. It's all there. It's all free, right? OSLI is a great resource. I use it a lot, right? It is my tool of choice because it's just easy to navigate, right? Once you know your way around. For those of you that are stylistically challenged like me, I prefer the classic Ostley rather than the new and improved funky looking red stuff. But hey, that might just be me. When we're talking about the main residence exemption, though, I'm going to give you a couple of key sections, right? When I sat down to write a piece of advice like this hybrid composite mismatch thing that I wrote, I wanted to read through the main residence exemptions division front to back, right? And how I do that, and this is just me, maybe not everybody has a brain that thinks like mine. I literally just went section by section and I tried to understand what each section was trying to do. So I just clicked through each one and I'm like, I write it down. I actually just copied and pasted some Excel, some sections into Excel. I said, it's this section. This is the title of the section and this is what it does. And this is why I think it's either relevant or not relevant to me, right? So my first MRT, GT, and AHT for all of you when you're doing this is don't be overwhelmed by the fact that Division 118 has 20 different subsections which deal with 20 different scenarios, right? Only 4 or 5 of them are really going to be relevant to you when you come to this. And the first challenge for you is to try and just get rid of the stuff that you think is just noise, okay? You can see from some of those sections in the middle there, death of an individual, destruction of a dwelling, you're not going to be in that type of situation, right? There's also something buried inside the main residence exemption for up to 2 hectares worth of vacant land. You can delete that as well, right? None of that stuff is going to be relevant. Try and focus and narrow down what you're doing to a couple of key things that you think are only the things that are relevant, right? And if you then got a colleague, go and talk to them about it and say, hey, these really the things that we need to actually think about. I should have prefaced this at the start by also saying, look, you're writing this advice in this way and doing it this way because you don't have a giant precedence database that have someone have already dealt with this issue. So you are, to some extent, recreating this or creating this from scratch, right? You need a process to be able to filter out what is relevant and what is not relevant and really focus down on the key issues. I can tell you that some of the key issues here from those section references over on the left-hand side of the screen, there will always be for these a base case as to what is applicable here. In the case of the main residence exemption, there are also a couple of key sections here. One is talking about changing main residences and what happens when you do. One is talking about what happens if you leave a particular property that you have treated as your main residence. And then there is an apportionment calculation, which we won't go into a huge amount of detail, but there is something in the examples around how you apportion a main residence exemption if you are not entitled to a full main residence exemption. So you may say, okay, well, I need to lie down now because I'm thinking to myself, how do I get my head around all of that? Like the world is spinning, okay? Here's what you can do. You can actually go and you can look at what the ATO has to say on this and try and interpret through the lens of what the ATO has actually said on this, whether your reading of the legislation is correct, right? The ATO won't necessarily use the section references, but they, a lot of the time, have some pretty good explanations as to how these things work. There are also a lot of firms out there that are all too happy to write blog posts on particular topics, right? Now, maybe you are also one of the clever people that has a subscription to Tax Nuggets Academy. Maybe there is contained within the Tax Nuggets Academy subscription library, something that might deal with the main residence exemption at some point in time. You've got a lot of resources out there to look for. So you're not doing this alone is my point, right? But you still do need to force yourself. If you want to write this type of advice, you need to force yourself to at least have some familiarity with the legislation. Originally, I wanted to call this session Getting Comfortable with Your Legislation. We worried that might drive a few people away, so we made it writing tax advice instead. I was overruled absolutely justly because I think this is a much better way of thinking about this. Look, Google could be your friend here, right? You might find someone that's written an article that will help make what you read in the legislation much clearer for you, okay? There's legislative extracts, and we are a full value service here, and we have hyperlinked them so you can go and look at them on Ostley as you need, okay? So we've asked a couple of questions, and we're like, okay, well, Mr. X is not an excluded foreign resident and won't get into why, but the main residence exemption is only available to people that are Australian residents. If you sell as a foreign resident, as a non-resident, other than for a couple of examples, which we will not go through, you won't get the main residence exemption. It's an edge of the cliff. It's all or nothing, right? When can you treat the sale of the properties in Sydney as your main residence from? That is a question that we need to ask because he sold a Hobart-based property. He's told us that Hobart-based property was actually his main residence, or he elected to keep that as his main residence for a period of time. You're saying, okay, well, we might need to think about some dates there, some critical dates, right? And then can Mr. X treat either of the units as his main residence while he is away overseas, right? And there are what we call absence rules, which talk about the fact that if you're renting a property out, you can treat them as your main residence for a period of up to 6 years. If you're not renting them out, and this is not what the legislation says, but if you're not renting them out, it's effectively indefinite. You can continue to treat it as your main residence as long as you are not treating something else as your main residence too, okay? What I like to do when I'm doing this is you've got all this information swirling around in your head. You need to be able to try and stratify the significance of the issues. Just make a simple matrix of some sort that tells you whether this is going to have a big impact or not a big impact on your calculation. If it's a big impact, highlight it, do something to it, make sure it stands out in big bold letters, because that will be the issues that you need to focus on firstly, right? I love tables. MRTG TNAHT number 542 is order your thoughts somehow. If you've got issues like this and you actually really want to try and put them down on paper some way, make sure that you do that in a way that helps you to be able to craft the strategy around writing this advice in the future.
I used to use OneNote quite a bit because you could take snapshots of screenshots, drop it in, put an arrow, and then you can sort of, put lots of notes around that screenshot. Miro is another tool. Sort of all those whiteboarding tools could help. But I think it's just getting all your thoughts down somewhere. And then you can visualize it and move it all around as you need to. So that's my little MRTG TNAHT.
Well done. You got it, Joyce. We had a practice session before this, and we were saying how quickly we could say it 3 times fast. People have got some good suggestions in the comments there around Copilot and the use of AI tools as well, right? There are lots of different things that you can use. Pick what works for you. I'm old school. I always have a notebook sitting beside me. I'm also a left-hander, so a lot of the electronic tools that people have for scribbling stuff down don't work so well for me. So I am happy to write things down old school in paper. If you've got a process that works for you, you do you make that work. All right. I also will just say that we did mention at the start of this that the CGT discount is something that's going to come into play here. Okay, the CGT discount is contained in section 115, in division 115. As we all know, it says that you basically got to hold an asset for more than 12 months to be eligible for the CGT discount. And as someone said earlier, from the 8th of May 2012 onwards, the CGT discount is not available to you on an apportioned basis if you are a non-resident of Australia. Okay, so that's going to obviously have an impact if Mr. X is considered to be a non-resident of Australia while he is overseas. Okay, now here's another suggestion for you as to how you go about this legislation. I take legislation, I just basically copy and paste it into Excel. Like I said, old school, right? Even though I am young and hip, I am an old man at heart. My wife would tell me I'm an old man in person too. I like to just basically just write things down and cross them off, right? So you either cross them off and say, okay, tick, I meet that criteria. Tick, I meet that criteria. Okay, so this section 115.105 says that you are able to get a discount percentage of 50% unless you are a foreign or temporary resident with individual or who is an individual with direct gains, right? This section applies to a discount capital gain if you're an individual, you acquire a CGT asset, you make a discount gain, and then certain things happen, right? Any of the dates that are relevant there to you end after the 8th of May 2012, which was budget night 2012, when they reduced the access to the CGT discount for non-residents, okay? So we know that's a really critical date in our head, and we need to basically think about, if we're writing a timeline of events here, we need to put sort of 8th of May 2012 smack dab in the middle of that somewhere so that we can come up with it, right? And then there's this final thing, and it says, if you are a foreign resident or a temporary resident, okay? And you're like, okay, well, foreign resident, that's a pretty easy answer, right? Like a foreign resident is someone that's a foreign resident for Australian tax purposes, okay? And you might be wrong, because a foreign resident is defined as someone that is not a resident of Australia purely for the purposes of the 1936 Act, so for the purposes of the domestic legislation. So you've actually got a separate question that you need to ask here is, and you can, just to be really clear for those that have done some work in this area, there are two ways for you to be considered a resident or a non-resident of a country. You can be a resident or a non-resident under domestic legislation, and then you can be a resident or a non-resident under the relevant treaty of the relevant countries that you're dealing with. Treaties override domestic law, right? But in this section here, this section is saying you have to be a foreign resident for the purposes of the domestic legislation, not for the purposes of the treaty, right? It's just a little wild card because I just like throwing things like that in. But that presents you with a question now, because you not only need to figure out if Mr. X lodged tax returns as a non-resident, you need to understand that he lodged them as a non-resident because he is a non-resident under the treaty or under domestic legislation. We are not going to get into that in any way, shape, or form here. I mentioned that just because I'm a self-serving guy, and I wanted to demonstrate that as part of doing advice like this, you might have situations where you actually need to go back a step, right? And the question you might need to ask, or the questions that you have asked when you've done the initial discussion with your client, might be incomplete. And you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? Do I have to go back to my client and ask this question again? Can I just quickly ask it over the phone? Is it more in depth? Can I hedge my bet somehow in this advice? Can I assume my way out of a particular problem, right? If I know a little bit about the main residence exemption and about non-residents in general, can I get a pretty good idea of where this is going to go so that I can at least move forward with this advice, right? These are all questions that you will have in your brain that you might need to answer at some point in time. I don't know what the answer is going to be for you. You need to decide that. But what we're trying to do is just to give you the idea as to, well, sometimes things might happen that upend your nicely made plans and you need to go back a step, okay? We are going to assume here, so final MRTG, TNA, HT there, initial scope and instructions are important. Do you actually need to go back and do more research? Do you need to charge more for this advice because you now need to look at more issues, okay? Because we are tracking well for time, I am going to skip a lot of this stuff other than to say that it follows the same basic formula as what we did for the previous slide on main residence, just to give you an idea as to how to organize your thoughts, okay? Now we come to the final bit of research we're going to do, which is the question that someone asked: how can you use two properties and claim one main residence exemption? Okay, to do that, you need to understand that in the main residence exemption provisions, a main residence exemption applies to a dwelling, right? And a dwelling is what's defined there on the left-hand side of the screen, the unit of accommodation, right? Are two units side by side treated as a single unit of accommodation or not, right? You're like, okay, well, how do I go about answering that question? Quick Google search will bring up tax determination 1999/69, which contains the ATO's views on combined properties and whether or not you can use the main residence for those dwellings, okay? We then go and do a bit of a research and we find out that there's some private binding rulings, right? The PBRs, right? PBRs you cannot rely on as an individual. The only people that can rely on a PBR are the people that actually asked for the PBR in the first place. But at least that gives you some thinking as to what the ATO's view on this issue might be if you can find a set of scenarios that's actually considered to be appropriate for you. Okay? So we have now come to the end of the research, and we are not going to hold everybody to the answers in this because we have spent not a lot of time on that. But let's give people the opportunity to come up there. Oh my gosh, I've been talking too long already, to answer for us which of these statements is true. Joyce, take it away and I will take a drink of water.
Sounds good. So, yep, Slido link is in the chat for you to participate. Which one's true? 5 options there. So the main residence exemption should be available on a day's apportionment basis. Next one, CGT discount is likely to be apportioned, not available for the full period. Third option, combined property usage appears to be consistent with ATO expectations, but the facts could do with some beefing up. Combined property usage appears consistent with ATO expectations, but I would recommend doing a PBR, a private ruling, for more certainty. Or you can just go, yep, all of the above sounds like it could be true.
Now, for those of you that have tried to hack university tests at any point in time, you do know that people love a good all of the above or none of the above. I'm not going to lead the witness here, but I do like the sound of an E in this scenario. Joyce, what do you think?
Yep, we can see a couple of people in the chat have said that is their top choice as well. Let's see. Yep, and 82% have also agreed.
Well done. You are a sophisticated bunch. I like every single one of you, and I appreciate you for who you are.
But yeah, so the facts could do with a bit of beefing up with the dwelling versus
Yep.
two separate units being a dwelling.
All right, let's go then to the preliminary conclusion. So you've now gotten to the point where you've got some preliminary conclusions written down, right? You're like, okay, well, I think I actually know what I'm talking about here. I know roughly what this advice needs to say because I've thought about and I've come up with the broad conclusions, right? When we're talking about writing tax advice, I would say steps 1 to 4 are more important than steps 5, 6, and 7, right? Or maybe at least in steps 5 and 6, right? You cannot write this advice unless you know what you're writing, right? Don't start before you've got all of the facts and before you've at least made some conclusions that you're comfortable on, because you will end up just spending so much time and making yourself so stressed because you won't actually know what you're writing. When you know what you're writing, it's so easy.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things, my mistakes when I was a junior. I would just start writing and then keep changing my answer. And I'm like, no, you got to really put all the hours in up front before you even open that Word doc.
Yep, absolutely. And there might be certain issues here which, look, the lazy accountant's way out of some things is to assume a certain answer. Assumptions are dangerous. You've got to be careful about what assumptions you're making and on what basis you're making those assumptions. If you're giving optionality and advice and you're making assumptions and saying, well, it's either one of these two things, maybe that's good enough. But just be really careful about the assumptions you're making and make sure that your client knows what assumptions you're making. So assumptions, facts, preliminary conclusions, really, really important here if you're going to be able to write this advice effectively. I've given some modeling examples here because when I do stuff like this, I like to be able to sort of put out a set of numbers that help make this real for me, right? I'm not going to take you through what these numbers are other than to say I basically tried to model out how the main residence exemption might work and how the CGT discount might work in this scenario. Again, please do not try and check the facts on the right-hand side of the page to the numbers on the left-hand side of the page because they may well not match. The number of times I've tried to tweak this to make this more relevant for everybody, just be very, very careful of that. Don't try yourself in knots if it doesn't work, okay? I then tried to do that modeling example and just done it on a single dwelling. But to me, there's 4 or 5 different outcomes here, right? We might know what the most likely one is, which is maybe it's Australian resident and foreign resident and dual properties, right? So a single dwelling for 2 properties combined. But maybe you also want to present some other scenarios just in case you're wrong or in case it's line ball. Okay, what does it matter if it's 2 separate dwellings versus 1? And do we need to think about what it looks like if they're a foreign resident versus an Australian resident? That optionality, you can use your judgment as to whether it's something that you want to do. You might not need it, right? You might be able to just have the conversation with the client with that modeling on the side to sort of say, well, this is how sensitive this particular issue is relevant to what you're doing. So context is really important here and the size of the issue, right?
I'm just looking at that table. If you go one back, like between the first and second scenario, that's like a 50K difference, right?
Yes.
So we better be very sure whether you're foreign or an Australian resident.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
let's really get that confirmed. Right.
So on the top marginal tax rate, that's what, 25 grand. So that where the tax, that's not nothing.
Yeah. That's
Sorry,
right.
I cut you off there, but yes, I think that's absolutely relevant here. And we're giving you this just as a template, right? Something that you can start doing if you want to try and do some of this stuff yourself rather than giving you the answer.
Yeah, because you might do like another scenario and you go, oh, but that doesn't make any difference to the tax outcome. So I don't really need to be concerned about that issue, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. Understand.
And it's really important to do that so that you then can focus and tailor your advice on the things that make sense. A lot of the time when I've dealt with clients and advisors, I've had clients that are across from me that have basically been saying something along the lines of the people we were dealing with previously didn't really understand and get the perspective of what we were trying to say. Right? If you've got an advisor that's got his head in the clouds somewhere and is giving you all of this really nice stuff, but is ultimately irrelevant because it doesn't really deal with the commercial realities of what you're doing, it's not going to work, right? That relationship will not flourish.
So yeah, let's be commercial about it and not completely academic.
Absolutely. And then we get to the fun the fun part, right? You've done most of the work. The worst is over, and then we're going to start writing this sucker up, right? I have given you a suggestion as to how I might write something like this, which is basically just to put some section references down and make sure you have these key things in your advice, right? You need to have somewhere documented in your advice why you are saying what you are saying. Those are the background facts and assumptions. Start by writing them, right? And be detailed about them, because that is going to help you communicate to your client. And it's also going to protect you if your client doesn't necessarily fully understand what you say and there is a miscommunication. You can go back to those background facts and assumptions and say, no, we discussed this on this date. We have got it written down here. This is why it's relevant, right? We're then going to write the meat of the sandwich. We're going to maybe give them some next steps. And one overlooked part, which we haven't really dealt with a lot in here, is the exec summary at the start, right? We said earlier on, choose your audience, right? Who are you writing this advice for? Are you writing this advice for a CFO that used to be and still is a tax nerd at heart that really wants a whole heap of section references? Or are you writing this for the mum and dad owners of a cafe that this is their life's blood and they know what they know and they know it well, but they do not know what you know and they do not understand, right? Get this done to a point where at some point you've covered yourself with the due diligence that you need to do, but also be able to dumb it down is the wrong way of saying it, Joyce. We need to come up with another way. Like, simplify and present it to your client in a way that your client is going to be able to get across to digest the gist of what it is that you're actually saying.
Mm-hmm. So like a classic example here is when you're doing those building inspections before you buy a property, they give you like this thick of a report, but I don't read it. I just read the first page only, and then pick up the phone and explain to me, is it good? Like, So it depends on the audience, right? But then if you're dealing with a building nerd, then you really need to go through the whole detail.
Absolutely. You might send a transmittal letter out. So we talk about formal tax advice. You might send a transmittal letter out with a tax return, and the client basically just comes back and says, look, the only question I have is where do I sign, right? They haven't read everything that you've sent, and don't feel rejected by that, because they just really don't care about the detail of how you got there. You care about it, and you need them to care on some level about the fact that you've done the due diligence. But ultimately what they really want to know is, how much is this going to cost me? Where do I sign? How do I get this going?
And that will impact how you quote for the first
Advice
step.
in the first
Yeah. Second
100%.
step. Was it the second step? The quote?
Second step was the quote. Yes. I'm not au fait at all with my steps. Okay. How you write this up. There's a lot of stuff in here which I'm going to say goes into the realms of Matt's personal idiosyncrasies, right? But I would say that there are some key things that you want to think about. You want to try and order the advice in a way that flows logically, right? You want to deal with, particularly if you're dealing with things where there are contingencies, as we have in this advice just very self-servingly made. If there are contingencies, you can't address the contingencies before you've addressed the basic proposition. So just think about this really logically. Do I have a base case that I need to explain and then talk about contingencies? I might need to quickly talk about the main residence exemption here and how it broadly applies. And then I might need to talk about, okay, well, if I have a main residence exemption, can I apply it to 2 properties? If I have a main residence exemption that's broadly applicable to me, can I continue to have that main residence exemption while I have moved away from that property, right? And then you might have some issues that don't really fit anywhere. Just bung them in a standalone section, right? There's no secret to this, right? It just needs to be ordered and logical and clear for someone to be able to follow, right? If you're writing a piece of advice where someone is doing like a simple restructure on something and they need something, right? Maybe the way to write it is not by issue at all, but to write it by date, right? If things need to happen on certain dates, you're going to actually follow that date sequence to write the advice as the case may be, right? Or you can choose the significance. Do you want to get across your biggest ticket items first or your least important items, right? Biggest, least important, I would suggest, is the way to do it, right? I've given you a suggested order of this advice, which I basically talked through there as well. I don't think we need to talk about more of that, other than to say that we will stuff some stuff at the end, which is basically next steps for a client to do if we think that they actually need to go and do something here for themselves. Okay. I've called this slide the write-up suggestions for writing styles and formats, and I'm going to pick all of these things. We could also have called this slide Matt's personal idiosyncrasies, right? So this is Matt's suggested ideas. This is not mandatory, right? I love bullet points. I love tables. I find that bullet points and tables really get points across in a punchy, simple type of way, right? Rather than large blocks of text, blah, 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 blah. If you had worked for the partner that I worked for when I first started, you would also have been given a list of A4 instructions, which included the fact that when you write things with bullet points, you must use square bullet points because round bullet points just look smug and unprofessional.
What?
Yep.
Okay.
I won't call the partner up because he was a really nice guy and I learned a lot from him. But yes, any graduate that joins the firm got a list of ex-partners' personal idiosyncrasies, which is where I have got the term from, and that included using square bullet points. They had to use square.
And double space after a full stop? Or single space?
I think it might have been double. I was terrible at double space. I never used it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Look, and then what I'd say is a lot of these things, some of these things I think are actually important. Let's park the issue of square versus round bullet points. If you want to vote up in the chat one of those particular options, please feel free. Use active language, right? Don't say that something is available. Someone say, you are entitled to use X, Y, Z, right? Active language makes for much punchier, clearer writing styles, right? When you're writing that active, punchy, clear writing, you are trying to use the bullet points to try and hammer those points simply and easily and quickly. If you want to order them to make sure that you don't end up with 25 bullet points on a page, you are going to put them into section numbers and you're going to go section 3, section 3.1, section 3.11, so that people understand, if they've got a brain that works like mine, how the whole thing kind of fits together, right? Remember to use your ILAC formula for doing something like this. For those that have done sort of any legal trading, ILAC stands for issue, law, application, conclusion, right? Discuss the issue, talk about the law, talk about how it applies, and then make a conclusion of some sort. You don't have to necessarily have each of those sections. You might combine some of that, but the idea is to have a formula and a structure, okay? A word of caution. Do not be unequivocal unless you absolutely have to be, right? We talk about using liability limiting language, right? Don't say will, say should, right? Because at the end of the day, you're talking about something that is your best opinion as to how something might work. In like really high level land, there are people that write different levels of opinion and will charge more for writing an opinion that is a will opinion or a should opinion or a more likely than not opinion, right? Not something we need to think about now, but language matters in terms of how you're actually going to couch this stuff for people. Break the thing up. I have seen pieces of advice from other advisors that have come across my desk that are basically just these massive big blocks of text on one page, right? If there's multiple sections, break them up so that you've got them on separate pages, make them double spaced if you have to, make it look clear and neat. Don't pad, right? You are not getting paid by the word, right? Don't use 10 words when 5 will do, okay? If you've got repeated terms, one way to make sure that you don't pad is to summarize those terms. So instead of me saying MRTG, Tax Nuggets Academy Hot Tips, I have been using MRTG, TNAHT the entire way through, right? Some people like to use those and then put inverted commas inside their brackets to describe the term. Up to you whether you do that or not, right? And then last but very not least, put a draft sticker on anything that you do. If you put a draft sticker on it, it is draft for discussion purposes, okay? You then get the chance to be able to go back to the client and talk to the client about what it is that you've done and make sure that it is updated. I've had some people that tell me that they would never finalize a piece of advice in their life. They would always like to leave it in draft for discussion purposes. Sure, I would go that far. Yeah, I know, right? People would use that as an escape hatch, but at the end of the day, this advice is a living document for you to use in discussions with your clients. At least don't finalize it until it's actually finalized, right? We've talked a little bit about the ILAC model, so I don't necessarily want to go through any more of it than that. Now we are going to give you a test. We are going to give you option 1 and option 2 on 2 pieces of writing, and you are going to tell us which one you like best and why.
I'm going to sit up for this one.
Yeah, we're almost there, everyone. These are the last 2 questions that you'll have to answer, and then we'll take some questions from all of you at the end.
Right. Scenario 1, option 1. The following advice is provided to you pursuant to previous correspondence with the undersigned and considers the tax implications of the sale of your 2 adjoining units. Okay. a bit long. Option 2 seems slightly shorter. Let's go option 2. Further to our initial meeting on X date, you have now requested formal advice from us to the likely implications of the disposal of your 2 adjoining units. Oh, hands down. It's a easy one.
Right?
It's an easy one for me. Yep, lots of number 2s. 2s all over the shop.
Does that mean that people don't like the use of terms like undersigned? I love undersigned and pursuant.
No, like I just felt like I was a news, like some really stuffy person when I was reading it as well. And then when I was reading option 2, it was just like so much more relaxed. Like I just felt like a human.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there is an arm wrestle match with me personally for someone that thinks they could write something better than either of those options. If you choose that, please feel free and we can talk about it after the session. What's our poll say, Joyce?
Yeah, 92% says option 2. Definitely.
Or there are some people that are willing to go out on the limb here and say that they think they could do better there. Look, the reality is you probably could, right? I dashed a couple of things off just because that seemed relevant and simple to me. But the reality is that I don't have a monopoly on how to write this stuff. You just need to make sure that you can get your point across and get your point across clearly and succinctly.
Yep, I was just going to bring that up again, but the only difference between the 2 is one is passive and the other one is active, right?
Yep.
The first one is saying the advice is provided to you, whereas the other one is saying you have asked for the advice. That's active. Like it's so much easier to read somehow, just that simple switch.
Exactly.
Love it. Love this example. All right, next example, background facts. Option 1, we have listed in the table below a timeline of key events in relation to the properties that you own or have owned based on the information you have supplied. Yep, table, love it. Option 2, oh, my brain is already fried looking at that.
Bear in mind, we've only got a few minutes left, Joe, so don't use them all up reading that paragraph.
Yeah. So it's like big paragraph straight away is an immediate turn off, right? Yeah, in relation to unit 210, you've moved into this apartment in August 2003, and then moved out again in July 12. While you previously treated another property at home, anyway, you've lost me.
We're all
obviously,
asleep.
Obviously, it's number 1. I don't even think. Yeah, we need to do the poll, I think.
Well done. No, I agree. Look, and it's a little bit contrived, let's say, but I've seen advice that's written much more like the options that are the least preferred options and the most preferred options. There are people that like doing it. That's how they were taught. Maybe they learned it in a different time, in a different era, right? Styles have changed over time. To me, active, clear bullet points, particularly square bullet points, are the way to go.
And if you can chuck it in a table, chuck it in a table.
Chuck it in a table. Tables make life so much easier. I would say that if you get one piece of advice to learn in terms of if you have to present something to someone, learn how to master tables. Okay, it is going to be better for you than pretty much any other skill you can come up, including Facebook memes. Okay, so this is just again some examples of background facts. How we write our background facts, right? You currently own these units. You're looking to downsize your living conditions and simplify your life. You've done X, you've done X, you've done Y, you do this. Background, bullet point. And then assumptions. Assumptions are key, right? We have outlined below a number of positions adopted and assumptions made by us based on your circumstances and what you have told us, right? So you're not just making assumptions for the heck of it, you're making informed decisions and calls as part of the advice based on what you have been told. That based on what you have indicated to us does a heck of a lot of heavy lifting there for you, because you need to communicate to the client the basis on which you have actually done what you have done. I don't like the fact that the person writing the advice there is a right-hander rather than a lefty. At some point in time on these slides, she was left-handed, which I felt worked a lot better for me. But anyway, that's fine. We'll deal with that. We are almost at the end. Step 6 is almost done, right? These are the most important steps. This is almost like our last MRTG, TNAHT. These are the most important sections.
I would just add, for background facts, I do like to put numbers on them.
Yep.
Because then the client can go, by the way, 1.1D.
Yep.
That's not quite right. As opposed to bullet point number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, because usually the background facts will be the thing that gets most referred back to. Because, there might be back and forth on that one. That's my MTRG TNAHT.
Well done. All right. Little bit here on how to cite legislation. You get a couple of options. You can do whatever the heck you want, but you've got two broad ways, right? You can basically just say, you'd never want to just quote the full sections, right? That's just lazy and it's going to take up a whole heap of space, right? You're going to say something like according to section blah, 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 or pursuant to. I do like the use of the term pursuant. It has a time and a place, right? So you can say that inside the advice, or you can use footnotes and you can basically say under the relevant provisions or according to the relevant provisions or whatever it is that you want to say, and then reference it down the bottom, right? I also like to add something in. If I know I'm going to be using mostly one piece of legislation, I will put that little thing in on the left-hand side there that note that any legislative references are to the Income Tax Assessment Act 1997 unless otherwise specified, right? That saves me having to quote ITAA 1997 after every single section reference that I put in, right? It's a good little anchor to help you simplify down the advice that you're given. All right, hot tips. Hot tips, choose your audience. As we said, not everybody wants all of the detail, right? You may need to put some level of detail in there, but maybe less is more for some clients, right? Less is more. Get your point across with basics. Don't overcomplicate this. Don't quote the legislation unless you absolutely, really need to for a particular reason. Plain English is going to be your best friend. And I would say that the point of this whole thing is you need to be able to distill down complex topics and complex pieces of legislation into bite-sized nuggets, let's call them. That seems like a relevant, good word to use, that you are going to be able to give to your client in that regard, right? Don't just quote the legislation to show off. You don't need to do that. It's not going to help your client in any way, shape, or form, okay? We then sort of say, okay, well, the client needs to do a few things, right? The client might actually might need to go back and do more information and do some extra research based on what we've told him to do. We're going to give him a whole heap of things that he needs to do for us to move forwards with this. And we're going to call that next steps. Obviously, because I am who I am, we're going to put that in a table. Okay.
Nice.
Now, we're going to just quickly talk on the use of AI, right? AI is great for some tasks here, right? I asked AI 3 scenarios. I asked AI to give me some PBR research. It did a pretty good job of it. I then fed AI some leading red herrings and asked it to come up with, for me, a piece of client advice based on one of these particular sections. It did all right. I'm not going to lie, right? It picked up on one of the red herrings, which was a date that I fed it that was wrong, which is that the non-residents are no longer entitled to the full CGT discount after 1 July 2017. It's actually 8th of May 2012, right? So you can already see that it's got some limitations, right? For those of you that are tempted to go and use AI full-blown to do stuff like that, I also created I asked AI to create for me a summary of a fictitious CGT case called Gardner versus Kidman from 1987. This case does not exist. The case that is relevant is from like the 1960s and it deals with water rights. So it's not even on CGT, right? This particular AI model spat me out an entire summary of something that did not exist.
Whoa.
So be really careful. I know we need some spacey sort of music in the background with that. Be really careful using AI if you don't know what you're doing. Don't ask AI to quote judgments for you or to cite cases for you without also checking whether those cases exist, because it will literally have a brain burp and it will give you something, at least on some cases, that is gobbledygook. Okay? Simple, a little bit more complex, but I was able to trick it pretty easily, and something that's just flat out just nonsense. Okay? Right.
It's really good for research.
Yeah.
It's a tool that helps you. You cannot rely on it fully to do the job for you. And especially if you don't have the basics of main residence, like you won't even know that it's telling you gobbledygook. And so, especially for, those that are not so familiar with the rules, you really cannot start with AI.
No.
Yeah, like I wouldn't recommend it.
It's scary. But
in
the middle there, it did a pretty good job of giving you an ILAC format of how to write the advice, right? Okay, maybe it doesn't look like how you might want it to look, but it does a reasonable job of going background, issue, law, application, right? Like it went through the entire thing. It didn't call it that, but it kind of followed that formula and that process, right? So it's got its benefits. It can help you if you get writer's block and you want to use this to start getting some ideas as to how to get into the flow of it. Sure. Just be really careful with how you use it, what you're quoting, what you're referencing from it. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Lots of comments about AI. So we might come back to it if we have time at the end.
Absolutely. And that is an MRTG AIHT. So an extra hot tip there with a few extra letters in it. Okay. Last section, and then we'll open this up for questions. You might need to do a client debrief, or you probably should do a client debrief. You don't just do this advice and then send it out and then sort of kick back and say, oh, my work is done here, right? You need to make sure that your client understands what it is that you're telling them. Okay. You need to make sure that they understand the conclusions and what the key points are within that advice that help to generate those conclusions, right? Don't just send it out and do nothing else. Use it as an extra talking point to go and have FaceTime with your client and talk through something, because they will really value your ability to be able to distill it from all of the stuff that you've done over on the right-hand side here to this simple bite-sized piece of digestible advice. Okay? Don't just issue this and issue a bill and move on. And don't send it out as final until you've actually got the client's approval, that they understand what's been written, they understand and agree with the background facts, and that you're able to move on. Most advice that you see written will have in it somewhere. If these background facts are not correct, please tell us, because the answer that we give you may well change. Okay. If the facts change, your view needs to change. No matter how much or by how little, you need to make sure that you go back and revalidate if your facts change.
Ooh, my favorite poll of the day is the, we asked you before what was your confidence level before the session, and now it's almost at the end. So what is your confidence level now with writing tax advice? So you got a few options there, and the link is in Slido for you to join in. So first option is, I want to stay with the numbers. This is interesting, but it's really not my jam. Are math details available for white label? Ooh, just dropping it in there.
Who put that in there? I mean, seriously, who comes up with these questions?
Number 2, I've learned a lot from this session and I want to try writing up some simple client advice. Or I might start with some internal file notes first, or I've got some good tips to incorporate into my existing advice. I might even sign up with Tax Nuggets as well as for some learnings. Have you got no shame asking such self-serving questions?
The answer to that is no, we do not. We absolutely do not. We are going to be shameless in promoting the excellence of this program, and we really hope to see you all again soon.
Let's see what people have said.
Look at that.
Great. It must be the Z that you dropped in there.
Yeah, I think so. Well,
Matt.
I am young, hip, and cool, right? I say things like Facebook, and I use terms like the gram, so I'm clearly up with how people talk these days. That's why I dropped the Z at the end.
Amazing. All right. Final key takeaways.
Key takeaways. And in Tax Nuggets, well, we always like to end on one key takeaway, because we are value add people today, though. We are going to give you like 5 or 6. Right? Prep is the key. Know what your client is after. Joseph, you wouldn't mind just helping me click through all of these things so we can get them all up on the screen for people. Clearly articulate what it is that you're trying to answer before you start writing this down, right? Order your thoughts. Make sure that you've got your presentation in a clearly digestible manner, right? And the final MRTG TNAHT is right in your own way and in your own style. You don't need to become a clone of me, right? I'm flattered, but you don't need to, right? What you need to do is work out your style and how you're going to be able to communicate with your clients effectively to give them the advice that they so desperately need and have come to you to ask. I think we're almost done, Joyce. What do you reckon?
And we are at Q&A now. I think we only got one question. The rest are sort of raised throughout. And then we also just launched our ratings poll while we're doing Q&A. Let us know what you thought of today's session. Question from Jason. In terms of research, how bad are the ATO community answers to the taxpayers by the ATO officers?
I am not ashamed to say that I have used the ATO community answers at different points in time, because sometimes they actually address a pretty complex issue in a fairly simple way. So I don't mind them, right? I'm not going to say use them all the time, but they're being used in such a way that they have to be vetted in some way, shape, or form. Okay, right? Do they give you the full answer? Maybe not. Do they give you at least a pointer as to where you might need to look and how you might need to interpret something if you're also wading through it? Well, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that was a real question, Jason. It sounded more like a rhetorical question. And someone has asked, do you have any sample tax advice? Or yeah, was this based on a real
It's
sort of a real?
let's call it inspired by a real life event, right? Like it's like a telemovie type of thing. I would say for the most part, most of your advice is going to follow you that simple formula, right? Like once you know what you're writing up, right? Once you've done that pre-work, it's pretty simple. You have a section which is the meat of your advice. You'll have a background facts. You'll have a conclusion, and you'll have a summary. There's nothing really complex about it. So if you want to do nothing but take that one page that has that sort of meat in the sandwich approach on it, take that away from it, because that really is the structure of your advice.
Yeah. All right. We're going to launch another poll very soon, but let us know where you first heard about us. That would really help with our marketing intelligence. Thank you. Final question, I guess, is from me, Matt. How much would you charge for something like this? Particularly this case study, just to give people an idea, since you're into the white labeling as well,
Yeah. Look, I think for me, I'd start with how many hours do I actually think this is going to take me, right? And I'd probably add a few more on for myself just to do a bit of research. If it's an issue that I know really well, I probably don't need to add that time. If it's a client that is going to be quite let's just say it could be quite challenged in terms of being able to pay for a bill like this. If I issue it, I might cut a bit off that and treat some of that time as my own personal professional development. I'm probably thinking sort of 15 to 20 hours worth of time by the time you do some modeling on this, by the time you research the issues, by the time you get distracted and look at cat videos on YouTube and then go back and sort of think about it. Maybe a day or two, right? Maybe 2 to 3 days if you really want to sort of polish this up. And then really it's just about that multiplied by your charge out rate to work out how much you're actually going to charge for something like this. But it's kind of how I think about it, like a day to do some research, a day to do some writing, and a half a day to polish type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And I do find coding the biggest challenge. Sometimes it's not the text technical. And what I used to do, I recall, is actually break it up in phases. Sometimes you don't really know what the big issues will be. And so like doing a preliminary calculation first, to even work out if there'll be any tax differences, and then only coding for the full-blown job as a phase 2. So that's a little HT there.
Yeah, look, I like that actually, and it's a really relevant point, because you might say, okay, well, look, there's a lot of things to unpack in what you as the client have told me. Let's deal with this little bit first, right? Because if we deal with this little bit first, and then we don't need to go through all the rest, it's not going to cost that much, right? So we might do a little bit of preliminary and say, look, let us get some initial thoughts. We'll put them down. We'll discuss them. And then maybe you don't need the full advice, right?
Yeah. Maybe the calc's really straightforward, and away we go. Amazing. Just addressing one question. Yes, the recording will be sent out to all registrants. So you can rewatch, all the glory from today. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It has been a blast. I have also learned a lot. Thank you so much, Matt. And everybody, yes, please put your emoji hands and your hearts together one last time to say thank you to Matt Hardy. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you, everybody.